There's the parasympathetic, there's the sympathetic, and there's the enteric. And at the bottom, at the base of this, is this enteric kingdom. It's a kingdom that rules from the esophagus, the stomach, the intestines, the pancreas, the gallbladder. This system in you is basically a tapeworm that's been saddled by a larger organism, and that larger organism is your dolphinic outer shell. Technically, your esophagus is and your stomach is its own living creature. It's not even technically; it has its own neurons. There's a lot of neurons in your stomach, a lot, and more than in your heart, in fact. And that this neurological system is only recently been recognized as a brain. And by recognizing it as a brain, it becomes more than fair and more than adequate for us to recognize it as its own entity. And I think the best way to understand this is three different kingdoms. There are three kingdoms inside of you, and at the base of this kingdom is this enteric kingdom. And if you can picture your stomach with a saddle on it, and that saddle is your bone structure and all the other outer organs that are relying on that horse, right? They're relying on that steed to carry them through the terrain safely. And by that terrain, technically the ground in which this horse carries you would be the food that you pass through your membrane. And as you place food inside the top of your torus and it exits out the bottom of your torus, what you're really doing is giving a footpad for this horse to walk. And so time itself from this, if you look at what time is to this enteric kingdom, time is the passage of food through its bay. That food is birthed to it from some unknown source outside of it, and that this food is passed, and that the journey requires that this enteric stomach choose what it wants to learn along this journey. It is not able to dictate the journey to itself. It does not have full control over the destiny of what food will come to it. Its only power lies in what it chooses to digest, and this should be familiar to you because it should remind you of you yourself. That the chemical makeup that is the world, the weather, the system of time, the system of everything that we have is its own passage of road, and that your experiences are feet that have no choice but to carry yourself through this journey. And so you can compassionate this enteric system as both autonomous but also bound. In fact, it's bound by you. You were the ruler of this enteric system. You alone are responsible for the torture or the love that enteric system is going to receive. As you give it yeast, as you give it salt, as you give it sugar, you are acting as a god. You are a Baal. The first definition of God came from the idea of bad weather. And it would be wise to consider this enteric kingdom as victims of your weather, and that the weather you pass it is directly related to the protein chains or the lack of protein chains that you choose to distribute down the river. It's river of time, which is your membrane. So separating yourself from your enteric system and seeing it as its own separate entity answers a lot of questions about addiction, diet, comfort, what food does to you, why you have a certain passion for food, but maybe that food might make you feel a different way, and why there's that lack of harmony sometimes that might exist is actually quite natural when you understand that this is its own kingdom, that this is its separate place. And for the first time ever, if you've never seen it this way, for the first time ever, you would begin to compassionate a system that you rule over, that you would begin to extend or bestow this idea of giving witness to this creature itself, and that the opening of that witness would actually relieve the pressure on its system to dump or refuse serotonin to you, that its only voice that it has to communicate to you is this pleasure. And the pleasure that you get from food is much more profound than you think. And the pleasure that you derive from food is also chock full of the humans that actually prepared it. A home cooked meal is a home cooked meal because it holds other kinds of energy, and that the space between the notes of every song is no different than the space between the smells of every taste. And that this space can be packed full of this intangible thing we call consciousness. So, in that space, in that intangibleness, there is the ability to communicate with a creature that's living inside your body. That you, as Osiris, would have this underling kingdom living underneath you. Above that system, relying on it, is this sympathetic system: your eyes, your heart, your lungs, your stomach, your intestines, your joints, and your skin. This system would be nothing without its horse. The system is its own kingdom, its own consciousness. Your heart has its own beat. Your breath has its own rhythm, right? And that these rhythms and beats go on regardless of whether you're conscious or not, whether you're sentient or not, whether you're stupid or not. That these systems have fail-safe AI living inside them that automatically run and operate. They're as simple as a thermostat in your home, but at the same time, they have their own matrix of emotions, desires, and what they want. Those two are also imprisoned in a way inside this higher system, this parasympathetic system. You know, it's probably not exactly that way. I'm sorry, I'm amending this as I'm speaking. Really, in a lot of ways, the parasympathetic is almost a slave to the sympathetic, but in a way of sort of justifying what's happening. And it makes sense that I might be confused about this at first, because we get the same confused about Washington, D.C., that we think Washington, D.C. is in charge, but really the role of the politician, as we just discussed recently, is not necessarily to change policy or to create policy, but simply to explain to the people that the policy that's already there is not going anywhere. And to give reasons and excuses to labor the blame of that is really an inflammatory response. So if you really look at who holds the keys to your body, I think you're really looking in a sympathetic place. And that sympathetic place you're going to find out tonight is your spirit animal. And that spirit animal is certainly wise. I'm not asking you not to trust it, but I'm also asking you to consider that your spirit animal needs you just as much as you need your spirit animal. And this might be something that you're not used to hearing, because you feel that the spirit animal is sort of a one-way street. And it's funny, we have that same false relationship with our enteric system too, or what we digest, what we choose to eat. As we talked about last time, the sexual arousal is an involuntary process, not necessarily controlled by your conscious mind. And I spoke briefly about how funny that seems to be when if we believe the idea that we only evolved from this place because we were pond scum fornicating ourselves into a fetish of survival, that creating a consciousness that would not allow us to turn on or off our sexual activity might actually make it harder for us to reproduce. Which gives us, I think, deeper clues into not only why you're here, but more importantly, how you're here, which is the time machines that we discussed last time. This idea of there being a forebrain and a hindbrain operating. And so the lessons we learned last time become even more complicated when we start to understand that limbic communication is a prana economy, a phrase we use a lot to talk about. But to break down this prana economy, you can think of it as a chemical reaction, a reaction of several chemicals placed into the same space, the same environment. And that if you understood chemistry enough, you would be able to predict, i.e., compassionate, what those chemicals are going to do once they find each other, once they discover that each other exists, and once they seek out this symbiosis. The symbiosis appears to have no free will. When you look at chemistry, you might want to say, oh, these chemicals, oil and water, have no free will. They are bound to the idea that they are in opposition. I would tend to agree with that. I would tend to say, yeah, water and oil don't have free will. And we might even argue, well, yeah, it's because they're not alive. Or we might argue that their time machine hasn't come online yet. And there's an autopilot built into all of your proteins, all of your amino acids that would act just like chemistry, and that you would automatically have a base root response, a template response that allows you to exist and survive in this world. That you would not be born still and remain still until your consciousness formed, that would lead to you being thrown away. And so you've had to develop certain systems that would persist regardless of whether or not you were online. And the tendency for us to commit this phrase emotional pedophilia I talk about, it really shines itself true here when we think and insist that everyone around us is online. And this insistence that everyone is online is typically where we lose our compassion and our safety, which loses us this top shed tier kingdom called parasympathetic, which is part of what we're learning today. So this prana economy, before the soul comes online, and even while the soul is online, there are these three basic rules. And these three basic rules are: everyone sheds, everyone eats, and ultimately everyone agrees. That every chemical that you mix in a vial agrees. And it may not look like it agree. You may say, oh, these don't agree at all. They're volatile, in fact, but actually, no, they are in agreement. It's you and I that created the idea that civilization would always be tame, kind, and polite. It's nature and chemistry that's been telling you the whole time. You're not actually paying attention. And so the prana economy that develops really would have nothing to do with how adept someone is. It would more have to do with how online someone is. When you come online, you end up rendering your own free will, I believe. But until you do, there is a base free will that is built for you that comes out of the factory that just simply allows you to survive. So this is at the heart of prana economy, and that you yourself are subject to this prana economy, and it's sort of a luxury in a sense, because you can go below deck, tend to something else, and give up steering the boat, but you've got autopilot on, and the rudder is constantly keeping you at your vector. It would be impossible for you to survive without this kind of system. So you, in fact, are a trinity, and there's really nothing more to argue about that you see it working in these three kingdoms. So everyone has a neocortex, but it was sapiens sapiens that turned it into a time machine, that Homo sapien said, I want to turn my cortex into a violent tumor of growth. I want it to explode. And that was such a massive change from the standard set of reptile, of vertebrae. And that massive change, for whatever reason, I think it's hard to not want to explain that this was somehow manipulated on purpose, because for whatever specific reason, this same Homo sapien, after taking a pretty abrupt 180-degree turn in its species, and actually flipping its hippocampus to where the tail of its brain actually started to point forward, much like a scorpion's tail. And that for the first time, we began to insist that this neocortex is more important than we think. And so Homo sapien takes it one more step. He doubles down, and he grows a growth on top of that growth. And for the first time, the neocortex explodes. Before it explodes, you'll see here in this illustration just a brief summary of all the other animals that have this forebrain. And as we talked about last time, the forebrain you could look at as your future machine, or are the past machines. So every animal still has their seed in time, but the size of the forebrain could be said to roughly point to the size of their future time machine. I'm going to contradict this just only slightly when we talk about bird brains, but it's more just to dissolve a common misconception we have about how dumb we think birds are. Oops, I need to turn that off. So everyone has this neocortex, which means actually everyone has this sense of self. That the neocortex really would probably atrophy if it didn't have something to do. In fact, if we get to the thalamus tonight, I'll show you what happens if there is nothing to do. And so the neocortex that's busy is the neocortex that insists it needs more space, it needs more resources to produce. When it comes to looking at how far you live in time, this is the map that I prepared to show you just how that works. That there is a reptilian underlord from the future, not an overlord, but an actual underlord. And this underlord from the future is only there because you yourself are too far away from it, that you're in the past, but this reptilian underlord is on the precipice, on the cutting edge of present. And you can see this. There's a 14 millisecond reflex from the jaw, a 30 millisecond reflex from the blink. Notice that your mouth works faster than your eyes. I believe this gives you a clue over what this reptilian underlord finds more important, or more importantly, finds more reliable or more trustable for his survival. And so I've got these listed for you sequentially because you can see his jaw is first, his blink is second. At 90 milliseconds, he can move his head. That even before his head, he's got this jaw reflex, which has to be 10 times faster. The mouth reflex is 10 times faster than thought itself, which is why this is why pigeons die when they eat rice at weddings. The reptile brain swallows. It doesn't say, should I eat that? It swallows. It doesn't have an opportunity to ask two of those luxurious questions. Should, and even the question itself, do I have a choice in what I do? So what I'm trying to explain really delicately here is that the fact that you live in the future, the fact that you have this Prometheus is literally the only reason why you even have free will. That this weird, stretchy rubber band relationship that you've developed with time gives you this window for a quantum of possibilities to exist. And it's very much a quantum because you compute all of your possibilities. And every single system in your body, believe it or not, takes these possibilities and fires them to one place called the thalamus. It sends them to a specific place. So every single separate organism gets to put their 2 cents into their system. And it's the thalamus itself that acts as this bridal chamber, this consecration, that who will the prince marry will determine the future of the kingdom. But every single suitor from every single country will be sending their hope chest in, their offerings into the thalamus, but the thalamus itself will only choose to mount with one, to choose to bond with one. And so the decision process that you see is very much the same thing. You have a quantum, a milliontude of decisions that you could make, but all of those are converged in a quantum inside the thalamus, which means that the thalamus collapses reality. It collapses reality, what you and I call reality, I should say, into the present. It takes all of these suggestions from the past and all of the suggestions from the future and conveys them into this inner chamber, this sacred chamber. That's literally what that word thalamus means, this sacred pillow. And that night, something is consecrated, something. Your distance from the thalamus is directly proportional to your rank inside the body. If you were second in command, you will only have one neuron jump between you and the thalamus. If you were third in command, you will have 3 neurological jumps between you and the thalamus. Every one of these neurological jumps is an opportunity for the bureaucracy around you to override your vote, that you send your tribute to the thalamus and you say, this is so important that we swallow this. This round torus that you see with sprinkles on top, we have determined to be a donut. And the delicate nature of our kingdom rests on you swallowing that donut right now. The joy it will bring us as a people will allow us to shine forever. And the thalamus is like, wow, that's a pretty strong case you make, right? And there is a bishop, a queen of sorts, that can override every decision, everything the bishop says, the rook says, the knight says, can be overridden by this one sacred queen that has not one jump from the thalamus, but actually vetoes the thalamus. And we've spoken about this before, and it's the nose, the olfactory system itself, the very system that you chose in the top of your mouth to turn off when you were born. You shut that off. It's been an atrophy ever since. What you think is smell is actually a passive sonar that you used to have an active sonar. I apologize if you don't know this, but a submarine has the ability for active sonar, which is, you might have heard the symbol of ping, and there's a ping sound that's sent, and that ping is the sending of a signal that active sonar will come back and they will listen to how long it took that ping to arrive, versus a passive sonar, which is not to send a ping, but simply to listen. And that passive sonars, the parabola, the peripheral vision, and the macular vision, you staring directly at something, would be this sense of active sonar too. Your queen, the olfactory system, it has more power than every piece combined. She has all of their powers combined, doesn't she? With this veto, what it really does is give her the ability to absorb the power of the bishop to go in diagonal, the power of the rook to go horizontal or vertical, the power of the knight to literally jump over pawns to achieve things, because she holds the veto over all of them. So she has all of these skills. So when you start to understand who and what you are, you were nothing more than a conglomerate of symbiosis. This is a scary concept to the mind as it comes online, which is why, like a jet ski, we have the safety mechanism built in, which keeps us offline until you finally approach the cockpit of this ship that were born inside of and slowly grew up in on your own. And one day you wander through this Millennium Falcon and you turn right down this corridor and you go down these steps, and suddenly you're in this giant viewer window and you see outside, and there's a steering wheel and there's a navigation, and you suddenly control this ship. And it's a scary endeavor. It could be terrifying, right? And so too is this concept of when and how, or even if, we come online. And as I said, once you come online, one of the scary things is really doing the math and understanding that my mouth has 10 times the power of my arms, that my mouth is 10 times ahead of myself, of my arms in time, which kind of shows you that you are screaming through time. The reptile screams through time with his racing goggles on, with his jaw first, his eyes second, his head third, his neck fourth, his shoulders fifth, his arms, his legs. And at the very end, trailing like a pathetic, overweight cross-country runner in 8th grade, not referring to anyone except for maybe someone, me. Anyway, way behind everyone else, after the girls' races started, is this little neocortex at 500 milliseconds. The very, very end of the line, the caboose of the train is you. That you yourself are the caboose. And it's so terrifying that you're convincing yourself that you control the train and that the tracks are yours and that they're laid down until you slowly see through the veil of Hades and slowly uncover the fact that this is how it works, that this is the system. And this startle reflex in milliseconds is really showing you this reptilian underlord. And more importantly, where you stand on his chain of command. The triune brain, I'm sure, is a system or concept many of you hopefully maybe have heard. If not, I'll just remind you. But this reptilian inner brain, this limbic brain, this second brain, which is what we were calling last time the hindbrain or epimetheus, and the neocortex, this Prometheus. So the reptilian is the now, the limbic brain is the past, the neocortex is the future. But I really want to hammer home a couple more analogies because I think it'll really help you build a neurology to understanding these different kingdoms. One of which is that we are looking at the id, the ego, and the superego, that the id is this reptilian part of you, that the ego is this limbic part of you, and the superego is this neocortex part of you, and that if you're not even 26 years old, you don't even have a superego. And I think right now, before Lemuria hits, we live in this dark age time where we treat everyone as if they have a neocortex by the time they're 18. And it's just simply not really dealing with the same species at that point. The same thing is reflected in the concept of id, ego, and superego, or kind of too esoteric for you, or if they're just too general, or you don't even like that framework. I think you could also look at this as the reptilian is the I, the limbic brain is the am, and the neocortex is the string name. String name meaning whatever your name is. If I was just talking to you, I would have put your name here, but whatever your name is would be that last piece. As we learned, it comes online. Your name comes online. Probably a reason why Jewish and Native American both have this tradition deep in their past of when you turn 13, you become something. Your neocortex is half online, right? It's half the work has been done. And you choose your name, you choose this concept of who you are before you move forward. So inside of you, this red part is a joystick in a plane, right? It's a jet fighter, and there's this joystick, and it's got the throttle and it's got the fire button, and you can see it right there. You literally wrap your fingers around this thing and wrap your thumb on top of it. And that's your motor cortex. It moves your flaps. It moves every flap. It turns on every thruster, and it fires every bullet, every one, including the sexual number one and number two, right? Number one, number two, and number three. All of those systems are fired by that same core. And that same core is living 480 milliseconds ahead of you. That's a long time. That's a long, long, long time to live ahead of you. To remind you again, the past, this hindbrain, it's looking back, the yellow part, the future, this neocortex, it's bent forward, it's looking forward, and the present, this joystick in the id. I want to take this moment though to point out that everything about you and your essence is actually built into this hindbrain and forebrain, and those things both happen to stop at the neck, which means that the future and the past are only in your head. That you tricky bastard, that you've been painting the future and the past so well in your head this whole time that you may not actually realize that they do not exist outside of you. And the answer is, hey, guess what? They do not exist outside of you. You made them. You made these things appear. This is your quantum. You are your own quantum galaxy, right? And you're able to convolve the universe you see and to collapse your wave of possibility into what you believe will happen, ultimately, what your will is. But we're still learning to navigate our will, much like a fighter pilot learns to handle the G forces of his own stick. And until he's ready, until he knows he won't faint under pressure, there's only going to be so fast he's going to go inside this ship. To sink this home and even further, if you've ever paid attention at all when you turn on a computer, that the first thing that happens when you turn on a computer is your BIOS boots up. Your BIOS, and it looks like this black screen on the bottom right. It doesn't necessarily say American Megatrends, but that's a pretty popular one. But sometimes you'll see Energy Star or Dell or something else, but it's the BIOS booting up. And if you read that, you could click on tab and you could enter into the operating system of your reptilian core and you could change your time clock. You could change the settings on your RAM chips. You could assign new primary hard drives and literally tell it where your body is. And there's these low level processes, and it's kind of tricky and scary. And most people don't like to even go into their BIOS because talking to the reptile is serious business. It's not a fun activity. It's not a friendly interface, in fact. Why? Because it doesn't have the luxury of this past and present. It has to be spoken to in very direct ways where you can only enter numbers like 1 through 4, different choices like that. It's very simplistic. Above the BIOS, though, right after that BIOS window boots up, you notice something fancier comes on. Your operating system comes on. And if you're on Mac or if you're on Windows or if you're looking at your cell phone, you're watching that operating system come on, and that operating system is really your hindbrain. I say that because most operating systems, or every operating system that's going to survive, has built into it a dummy proof system that tries to make it harder for the driver to destroy it. That through password memory, through, hey, are you sure you want to throw this away, to, hey, man, are you sure you want to empty your trash can, to, hey, your firewall's not on, or are you sure you want to see this site, or are you sure you want to download this program? That from the very system that the hindbrain comes on comes a system of doubt. That the past brings you the ability to doubt the now, to doubt the future, to doubt what might happen to someone, and that doubt comes from this very idea of learning to test pain, and that pain teaches us doubt, and doubt teaches us resilience to change. It doesn't teach us anything else but just to try something. So at the very heart of every motivation you have comes this gift that came to you, which is doubt. Doubt in the present. Doubt in your insistence that if you do nothing, everything will be okay. And so all systems come online from there. This is your operating system. And as you're using your operating system, you notice that inside your operating system, there are several programs. You can run several of them. And you can open up Calculator, you can open up your browser and literally go anywhere. You can open up Photoshop, paint some pictures, and all these applications are simply identities. And that you yourself, the identity that you think you are, your name, your string name, is the application or the game that you are running inside the operating system, which is resting on top of the BIOS, which booted the computer and literally tells the machine inside where everything goes. This is your motor cortex. The thalamus is the only one that has the key to communicate with the motor cortex, where the motor cortex can trust it. And so all these decisions are collapsed through your operating system into your BIOS, and you hear this magnetic needle write or erase, write and erase, write and erase a piece of silicon inside your body, inside your hard drive. The I and the am would be the noun and the verb, wouldn't it? And that the I, the noun, the sense of I, develops a sense of am, as we talked about, only by having a sense of memory, and only through memory do we develop the past, which basically proves that the am exists inside the limbic self. The limbic self is the amness of you. The reptilian self is the I-ness of you. The I-ness is pure reflex. The amness is pure, oh fuck, did that hurt or did that not hurt? And above this is your name. You can see different systems, how they each run. I won't read them all here, but the reptilian complex run in the basal ganglia. The basal, basically just a simple word for an area of the brain. This ganglia is technically a misnomer. It should be actually called a nuclei, but it was named before our anatomy got straight. But basically, it's just a collection in a space. So the reptilian is a collection of reflexes that are centralized into a space that you and I start to call a system, and that you and I would only know that it's a system because we have a past and a future, right? that without the past and future, we wouldn't even know it's a system, which is why I'm trying to tell you and convey that the I doesn't know it's a system. The I does not know its separation from the world. You show a reptile its reflection in the mirror, and with the exception of the few idiosyncratic cases, or sorry, that's the wrong word, but there's a few people that love their lizard so much that they insist that this doesn't happen. But most animals will attack their own reflection. They find it terrifying. Terrifying because they don't have the I has no am to relate to. It has no idea to even learn about itself. You cannot learn about yourself until you have this memory to build this idea of test response, test response, test response. Every reaction you have to what you think is consciousness really boils down to you testing whether something is conscious or not. How do you test something? You secretly manipulate it into making itself adjust to something that makes it more comfortable. What if I was to tell you that every conversation you have is that you pushing someone into a state of discomfort? And that the reason why you're pushing someone into a state of discomfort is because you want to know if they are alive. So what do? You say, hello there. James, how is hello there a state of discomfort? Because all of us are socially connected through our inner ear. And through the inner ear, you've been trained in a process where if you hear something, you answer, and you physically feel itchy if you don't. You feel discomfort if you don't. So when someone says hello there, they're actually putting you on the spot. They're actually saying, prove to me that you exist. Prove to me that you are alive. It's a challenge question is what it is. And so you answer back. You answer back proving that you exist. Why do you prove that? Because you've just demonstrated that you have the ability to accept something from them and respond to it, which really means you're just showing that you are reactive, that your reactions are online, right? This defines the relationship that they have with you from the moment you prove that by saying hello there, right? Now the system recalls itself because you've set up a protocol. You just like a web browser. When I go to https google.com, I tell Google, hello, I'd like to establish a TCP/IP connection with you through a secure socket layer. Do you agree? Hello there is hello, I'd like to establish an asynchronous connection between the two of us using the protocol of English. Do you agree? And his answer, hello, is that agreement. Both of those agreements are you two now forging a reality, a wormhole between universe and universe. And that wormhole only exists because of this relationship, this trinity that exists. So you develop things like jealousy, one of the most beautiful emotions. You want to know why jealousy exists in the world? Because there are people that do not know that they exist, and jealousy reminds them, wait a minute, a person that deserves more. And this jealousy I feel is the inspiration that I have, that I deserve this thing that I do not have right now. It's the most beautiful motivation jealousy is. It shows you that you have lack, and the only reason why you have lack is because you found a shell that was big enough to fill your potential, and that your potential has to get off its ass, right? That's what jealousy is. So all of these emotions we have are the limbic systems growing, exercising themselves, right? Proving that they have relevance in this world, which is really the essence of am. I am, I am, I am. I relevate, right? I am relevant to myself, to others around me. I am. So this trinity gives you 3 different kingdoms to trade with. You trade with these kingdoms, don't you? Who you think you truly are is really some sort of diplomat. And you're opening trade routes into each of these kingdoms that are autonomous, that their economies don't necessarily need you, that you have to do what they have to do. You have to prove your relevance to them by saying, I'm online now. And the first thing the reptilian says is, no, you're not, dude. You're going to go to bed, or you're drinking a beer, or you're not. You don't know that pure dangers of hypothermia. You're not even wearing a jacket. And that slowly you build authority, you build confidence inside these kingdoms by showing up for them, by relying on them, by recognizing them, by animizing them, and by freaking talking to them, by talking to your stomach, by talking to your limbic self, by acknowledging your jealousy as a beautiful sign of a hermit crab who's just found a bigger place to live. All of these reactions are giving you opportunities to respond to yourself. And every time you respond to yourself, you're given more privileges. And one day you'll notice the reptilian overlord has given you the keys itself to the very cockpit that drives your body. And that's a special relationship. And what happens then? The self-talk stops. You become a different kind of antenna, and your life changes from there. You might call this a sidebar, but I really want to hit this home. I briefly mentioned this last time, this idea of these postures. Decorticate and decerebrate. I've been singing decerebrate, good times, decoriate to try and remember it, but it's like decorticate. Oh, decorticate. Yeah. I want you to look at these postures that if you could fire every reflex in the body, right? If you could pinch all the nerves that you know send in a reflex, I think that by pinching those nerves, what you're really doing is you're demanding now that you're shutting off the territorial authority of the hindbrain and the forebrain. And by shutting off those territories, your identity is reduced to your inner brain, to this reptilian brain. And so the reflex action of the body when it's in a state of this decortication, if that's a word, or decerebration, I hope that you can see from these pictures that I've shown is really just expressing the true nature of who it is. That this posture is the self living inside this inner brain, living inside this idness, the bios. The body takes the shape of the bios because the body is the bios, right? All the reflexes have been triggered, and so you become the actual shape of your consciousness, right? And that's what this is. This is a cross section of your spinal column. And when you deal with the world, you're going to have negative emotions that come in, and you're going to have positive emotions that come in. And you're going to send out negative emotions, and you're going to send out positive emotions. And what those really mean, I think, could be reduced to the words dorsal and ventral. And that this idea, I turn my back on you, is the oracle of mythology explaining to you that it knows exactly how the body works. That when you were in a parasympathetic state, you open your lines of communication to ventral communication. And ventral communication would give you this ability to share. And by sharing, you are now reading the faces of others in the room. And by reading the faces of others in the room, you are becoming susceptible to all of their emotions because you tap into their face and you create this HTTP connection, just as you do with Google. And you actually don't get to dictate what Google's going to send you. And they could play you some of the most obscene information or propaganda you could see. And there's really no way that you could unsee that because of the nature of how we work. And because of that, your body has to have these really strong mechanisms that are built in, where if the body receives enough of a negative signal that causes it enough stress, the body will switch into dorsal mode and dedicate all of its resources to its back. So when something turns its back on you, it's actually saying, I'm only going to watch you like a hawk now. I'm only going to become dorsal really, really means I'm only going to become afferent or sensory, right? I'm only going to become receptive, much like when a predator finds a rabbit, the rabbit becomes receptive and simply watches the predator from a dorsal place. The rabbit will not communicate because its ventral system, the front of its spinal column, says no. No, we do not engage in the luxury of communication because this is a dangerous situation. Our dorsal has taken over. It needs all of these things, which is why our motor, our efferent systems that run down our spine, because they come down our ventral pathways, we can sometimes faint. We lose the ability to even move. The reason why we cannot move is because our dorsal system is overloaded and is running things. This is a safety mechanism. It's a safety response. It's actually your body doing a good job, which is why it's so important for you to come online, because when you're online, you're going to be able to give your ventral system the confidence it needs when it's needed. Same for your dorsal too. So the intrinsic nature of reality itself as being a negative or a positive emotion is literally expressed inside the center of your spinal column. If I don't understand you, I can no longer parasympathetically regulate with you. We like to think that when we say, I don't understand you, it's because our mind doesn't follow what the other person is saying. I don't think that ever happens. I think that when someone says something, you try and keep pace with them, and you put the pace in your system and you hit play, and you find it to be maybe similar to how a mother might view punk rock music or something that disturbs the system, that your immune response is to not understand it. It's an immune response. But because you live in the caboose, you create this idea that you don't understand. What you really mean is that you cannot regulate to it. I cannot regulate to this system is what's really happening. Your signature. This is pretty cool. So when you sign your name, it turns out that you have to enter into a delicate slow dance where your parasympathetic and your sympathetic have to work in tandem. And this is beautiful because from a very early age in our history, we started to associate someone being responsible for when someone signs their name. Why? Because when you sign your name, you demonstrate an ability to have a delicate dance, a harmony between your parasympathetic and sympathetic. And you can understand why, because a signature is certainly a motor. Your motor response gives you the orders how to conduct itself to sign your name. Mine would be 80 degrees up bubble, hard stop, negative 10 degrees down, straight down, going backwards, descend past the ascender baseline, another 80 units, and I just drew a J. And that motor cortex that fires that signature, our motor cortex could simply, it knows the shape, but if the motor cortex tries to sign its name, it loses the calligraphy and, more importantly, the relaxation that makes a signature real. The X is the reptilian telling, I am in charge. X marks the spot is the reptilian signing the name, because the delicate balance between the cerebellum and the basal ganglia hasn't been learned yet. When one learns to sign their name, they learn to create an integration between these two places. Otherwise, it doesn't even look like the signature. Keep in mind, the signature isn't necessarily shape. A signature is calligraphy. What does that mean? A signature is a time ballet. It's a movement of the hand through time. So how fast and how slow you get there is actually even more important than the direction of the shape. We've spoken a lot about calories before, but if you really want to start to truly understand the low calorie brain, the best way to start is with a bear. That size is equal to threat. Shrink makes you feel comfortable. When something shrinks in your eyes, you feel comfortable. When something grows in your eyes, you feel danger. The only exception to this is when you outweigh your opponent. And the manliness, the art of manliness, which is hilarious that this meme was put out by the art of manliness, it shows you that when you encounter a grizzly, you don't run, you lay on the ground and you play dead. You roll over in a fetal position and you show it your ass. But if you encounter a black bear, it's much different, right? You shake, you yell, you scream, you act larger. So this meme is telling you to do two different things based on which kind of bear you see. Then it starts to educate you later in the article about how to even explain to identify which bear is which. So why would you have two different reactions to the same animal? And it comes back down again to this idea of size. Why does it come down to size? Because size equals threat. That's why. And not only does this size equals threat, but when the threat shrinks, you feel comfort. And when the threat grows, you feel danger, which is why every animal that you know has the ability to haut itself, to blow itself up, to raise its haunches or its cackles or its feathers or its fur and to appear larger, because that would be the response to what? To regulate its opponent's nervous system. Why does it regulate it? Because the opponent feels advantage, and that the threat itself feels that advantage and wants to regulate to it to disallow the advantage, and so therefore grows itself in size to compensate, which is what? That's a symbiotic relationship, isn't it? That really what's happening is that your nervous system is responding to the bear's nervous system, just as any other animal will respond to. And you develop strategies for which response is better. And these strategies are profoundly creative. You have to know your opponent. You have to know what it is you're facing, right? And a good way to do that is to understand the brain that you're dealing with. A rat brain is tuned to the nose, its smell. Birds' emotions are tuned to their ears, believe it or not. That what they hear dictates most of their limbic activity in their brain. Fish, entirely different. The limbic nature of fish really is more responds more to electricity than anything else. The electricity in the water creates its limbic dimension, its limbic self. To know thyself may not necessarily be to know thy enemy. That thy enemy would simply be based on what? Who has size? Size is more of a metaphor here, but that which is larger would constitute what something could be we would consider our enemy. If we outflank our enemy, it's hard for them to become our enemy if they do not pose threat. This threat is the reptile loop. That there is a giant species of world that require threat to survive. That threat itself reminds the lizard that it's alive. And so the reptile loop is simple, and that you will find this inside human beings. You will find them running the reptile loop sometimes. And when you recognize this, you have the ability to compassionate them very deeply because of how simplistic their loop is. It really becomes very simple. And when someone's not online, you're going to find the same simplistic loop running in a lot of people's cases. I don't think it runs all the time. I think each of us slip in and out of autonomy, if that makes sense. That some of us may come online for 7 minutes every day. Some of us may come online for 7 minutes every year. And that our percentage of that truly is based on our Zen ability in this dojo, right? To not necessarily grab the reins, although certainly that's important, but to not let go of them. This reptile loop, though, is a much simpler process. Number one, what is different? That the loop is the iteration that runs every update. Every time the processor it comes back and it asks the program, the reptile program, what do you want? I got some time for you. What do you want? The first thing the reptile says is, what's different? And the thalamus has received all of this information. And thanks to memory, thanks to thought, that knows which things are different. And so the neurons that are different are able to fire, and that's routed to the reptile. And the reptile is able to determine, out of the 60 trillion inputs that we just read, Which of these 60 trillion inputs are different? And now it focuses only on those different things, which means you just discovered the largest blind spot that's ever existed inside the reptile mind, which is what is different. That you find a camouflage in the sameness when dealing with a reptile, that you become invisible. You've heard of this concept before in Men in Black, that these figures that wear this black become invisible to a certain kind of consciousness. And it's just discussing the anatomy of the brain. It's not even sci-fi. They're just telling you how the brain loops. The reptile will not see you if you do not move. Number two, is this thing that's different? Remember, this is only with what's different. Is the things that were different, the last loop, out of all those things that's different, which of them is a threat to me? It runs this loop. It tries to determine if it's a threat. Most reptiles really aren't able to determine threat or not. All they can really determine is what was my system last loop and what was my system this loop. Which one feels better to me? Better is a very simplistic definition to the reptile, though, because better isn't built on a future or past machine. It's more built on a what was my last reflex machine. This comes back to number one, what is different? The reptile doesn't have a long brain, which means the very next signal is going to overwrite the signal that was stored before it. This gives the reptile a kind of blindness, an ignorant blindness, which also makes it brave, which also makes it dangerous. This is the essence of white belt. The true power of the white belt comes in this ignorance, this blind ignorance that gives you the courage to exist. After is it threat? Only then does, after it passes these two luxuries, does the reptile ask the final, most important question. And I stress this, it's the final question. Because the brain is done at this point. The reptile has satisfied its entire consciousness in this third question. Is that food? Is it different? A. Is it a threat? B. C. Is it food? So the only way the reptile eats is what? It shows you the only way a reptile eats is there something different? Am I detecting something different here? Right? And is it not a threat? Only then do I begin my survival system. The reptile brain has the code. You've seen this code in humans around you. And the reason why you see this code is because you're watching a human operating on this involuntary AI system, factory reset position of the reptile only. The first code of the reptile is all pain is evil. This is before the neocortex is online. Pain isn't looked at as in a positive way at all. Therefore, all pain is evil. Why? Because pain costs calories. Why does pain cost calories? Because more action potentials come screaming into the brain, and the brain has to burn more calories to process them. And so the reptile would prefer a world of no brain calories because that's how it survives. It's cold-blooded. It preserves every bit of its energy. And so it looks for a state that actually sends its brain less information. So all pain becomes evil at that point. Survival is 100% based on success. That all that matters, that's your only success, I should say, sorry, is survival. Can the reptile survive? Doesn't matter if the reptile has a good life or a bad life. Why does that not matter? It doesn't know. It doesn't know those things. So you find a simplistic attitude in the reptile mind, don't you? You find one which is, will I survive through this? And that would only come from this lower state, this sympathetic state, where fear becomes more of the motivator, right? Where survival itself is that base route that you would need to prove to the system that you are willing to take over. That when you demonstrate to the steering wheel of the AI inside your device that you want to survive too, it decides to give you the reins and allow you to drive again. So if you see the world through the reptile, you're going to find it's got to be low calorie. I have to feel that I will survive the whole time, and that any pain I encounter is going to mean failure, that I've failed. Whatever choice it was that I went to, this pain proves that I should not have done it. And this is the antithesis of the neocortex. The neocortex works exactly the opposite of this. As you know, it is not enough to control your reptile. Society demands that you insist it's no longer there lurking in the shadows. You are accepted in society by proving that your reptile is dead. And how do you prove that? You lie. You lie to people over and over to prove that your reptile is dead. You lie by expressing opportunities where your reptile might show itself and proving that it does not. The expression holding your tongue is a sympathetic muscle. It's a reptile muscle that your neocortex demanding that it can hold its reptile is the equivalent of holding your tongue. I think it's safe to say James Drew really doesn't hold his reptile much. That I'm poor at that, and many of you are poor at that too. And this is why you probably have a symbiotic connection with your reptile. You probably feel sorry for it, so you don't hold your tongue. You allow it to express itself because you want it this freedom, because you are looking for a piece of your own. There's a certain piece that you want, this congruence between the sympathetic and parasympathetic. And why is it that that always looks like a shaman who comes out and starts speaking, starts saying how they feel? And this terrifies everyone around them, but not the shaman. Why? Because it's helping the sympathetic system regulate with the parasympathetic system. It's helping the person sign their name, i.e., become the identity of who they are. The reptile is always sincere because the reptile lacks the budget for deceit. Deceit is a luxury of mammals. When you create an identity for yourself, you have a timeline, and that timeline basically says, my name's James, I live at this street, here's my phone number, my social security number is this. I mean, those are arbitrary, but you're constantly repeating yourself to yourself. You have to repeat. Repetition is necessary, or else you lose neurons, which is why you have thoughts about who you are all the time, because you are trying to preserve. You are bailing out a boat that is filling with water of amnesia. Every day you wake up, you bail out and say, I am this, I am this, I am this. And you're removing that water to preserve that salt, because that salt is the only memory you have of who you are. It's all potassium tricks. That's all it is. So the reptile barely has enough timeline for himself. So deceit would be something that would become impossible. Impossible. Deceit requires that you find enough calories to build a completely separate timeline than yourself and then deceive it. So not only for you to deceive, not only do you need a timeline for yourself and a separate timeline for your deceit and for you to know the difference, but you would need a timeline for the person you're deceiving, which is probably the most caloric thing of all this, because the reptile can't even look at their own reflection. So how the fuck could they even compassionate someone else? It's impossible. Which proves to you that deceit is the creative act of the mammal. It is a secret, special magic power that we've developed. And we only developed it through this time machine. Bird brain, this concept of a bird brain, comes in the same way. Information is expensive. As a bird rehabber, the first thing I do when I find a bird that's been injured is I cover its eyes. Why? Because I've compassionated the bird brain. If you haven't compassionated the bird brain, it might be that the first thing you do when you find a bird unconscious is give it water and food. I appreciate, I know that we care, but this always cracks me up. You're giving someone in shock something that they could only use if they were in a parasympathetic state. So when you're giving that bird the water or the food, you're saying, hey, I think you're in a parasympathetic state, bird, which means I think you're cool, calm, and collected. I think you're so cold, calm, and collected, you decided there's no threats around you, and you open up the possibility of feeding. that this luxury of feeding comes out of you only after you've isolated and removed all threat, shock, problems, or pain. But you've just smacked yourself into a window. And truly, all of the stress that's going to enter the bird is going to come in through its eyes and through its ears. And for the bird to leave the state of shock, you would want to remove all eyesight and sound that come into that bird until it's ready for those systems to come back online. So to understand the bird brain is to really understand some simple rules, right? Information is expensive. Data is stress. All data is stress. Ignorance is speed. What does that mean? By the bird knowing less, the bird's reactions are faster. There's not a system of, there's not a half-second long train going by. And at the very, very end is the caboose, right? It's like 15 milliseconds inside the bird's brain. Every decision is going to be processed somewhere in there. By the way, I don't know what it is. I just said 15 milliseconds. But if you look at how our jaws work and everything else, and look at how big a bird is, I'm guessing maybe it's 15 milliseconds. So their time machine smaller, but smaller doesn't necessarily mean weak, which kind of brings me to this next point that is kind of another sidebar, but I just think it's important to realize that birds aren't actually stupid. The macaw on the left has a brain the size of a walnut. The monkey on the right, I think it's called a macaque, has a brain the size of a lemon. So in this case, the monkey has a brain that's about 5 times larger than the macaw, but the macaw actually passes more sentience tests. So the macaw actually satisfies itself as a more intelligent creature. And one of the main reasons why is because inside of its neocortex, it has more neurons. It's not the size of the brain, it's the number of neurons. That there's just sheerly more neurons inside that system. So this concept of larger brain means smarter isn't necessarily true. Neurons are going to give you resolution. This is a great way to think about this. If you're into this, is this concept of 8K versus 4K versus HDMI, right? And that when you're watching a video, you might see, or when you're watching a ball game on HDTV or whatever versus regular TV, you're like, damn, that's a nice picture, or damn, this picture sucks. And that the brain would work the same way. It has a certain resolution. Most people don't know this, but sadly they go out and they buy a big monitor and they think, well, I bought a bigger monitor, therefore it's gonna give me better resolution. But they buy that bigger monitor from Amazon. They don't realize that Amazon is sending them a 1920 by 1080 monitor and just saying it's 50 inches, and it is. But the 50 inches means that there's only 1,920 pixels between the left side and the right side, right? So in the same way, you can see that you can have a bigger monitor but a lower resolution. Your brain works the same way. Therefore, neurons are pixels. Neurons are pixels inside of your conscious chalkboard because you're able to build a reality out of these pixels, right? You're building a neurological feature set or, model. You're building an entire miniature inside those neurons because those neurons are pixels. Voxels would be a better way to call them, which are video pixels, but don't worry, I won't bore you with stuff like that. So big isn't always better. After you've looked at the simplicity of what we just talked about, the reptile brain, we start to consider the more complex systems of the hindbrain. This is your epimetheus, your past system. That you'll notice one of the big weird things that exists inside the hindbrain is social veto. That most things with fur incorporate some sort of social veto with each other. And that the species itself is a collective. It's not a singularity, it's a collective. And the collective utilizes its social structure to survive. How does that work? One mouse can learn a maze. That mouse can come back to the nest And within a few hours, through some sort of weird osmosis none of us understand, the other mice understand the maze. They solve the maze instantly. We It could be that the first thing the mouse does is come back and say, "Hey guys, here's how you solve this maze that you're getting ready to take." But that's you're giving a lot of assumptions that this mouse knows what's coming in the future, that it even has a future. This is why we need to rethink consciousness, ladies and gentlemen. This is to me, this is one of the big points that points to this concept of morphic resonance or species resonance, that there's an epigenetic chemo smell, chemo signature that is put off. But because you and I have chosen to dull our olfactory, we are missing all of this vital data, which is keeping us out of this Lemuria, which I'm fine with. I kind of prefer the mystery. But it stops us from understanding this deeper nature. And the only way that we can then come back and congruate, or try and find that place, I should say, try and find that Zion, is through social vetoes, through social learning, is through relying on our species intelligence so that many of us can learn collectively. No, I've said this a million times, but the first time man ran a 4-minute mile that same year, like 6 other people did or something. They were like high school kids. It's just that easy. It's just that easy. There's something in this quantum. I believe personally that it works with a technology belief, that really what's happening is that the high school kid who ran a 4-minute mile now believes that it can be done because he saw someone did it. And that's truly what unlocks this ability to do it, is this belief. But that science is a little bit harder to prove or demonstrate to you zetetically right now because of the systems we have for proof. One of the biggest things that shows you just how powerful the hindbrain is when it comes to determining the entire world, and I mean warping it in kind of a sick way, is mutilation. If you were to open the DSM, the Diagnostic of Mental Illness, I forget the acronym exactly, but it's in its like 5th edition or whatever. But you open the DSM-5 and you want to look at, well, what does mutilation really mean? You end up with a definition that looks like this. And I'm reading this because I want you to understand that the hindbrain is pretty psychopathic. NSSI is a term for this self-injury, concept of self-injury, just another word for clinical word for mutilation. But what is the DSM-5 definition of NSSI? According to DSM-5, NSSI diagnostic criteria is as follows. Over the past year, in order for you to mutilate yourself, this is the criteria, okay? Over the past year, person has to, for at least 5 days, engage in self-injury with the anticipation that the injury will result in some bodily harm. No suicidal intent, though. The act is not socially acceptable. This is the last sentence I want you to focus on. The act is not socially acceptable. Guys, this book tells you that the definition of mutilation is whether or not it's socially acceptable. And this is why circumcision is socially acceptable. Mutilation, we don't define mutilation by whether it's moral or not. We define mutilation by whether or not there's a majority opinion about it. You can shove metal projectiles through your ears all day long, right? You can wear earrings. You can mutilate yourself. You can cut yourself in certain situations. And it's moral socially as long as you only do it for 4 days. If you mutilate yourself for 4 days and 23 hours and 59 minutes and 59 seconds, you didn't mutilate yourself. It shows you how freaking insane the hindbrain world is. And keep in mind that we make this assumption through emotional pedophilia that everyone's online, which means a lot of people that are making the rules that you and I both follow are following this idea that mutilation is defined by what other people think mutilation is. Shock therapy is pain medicine. And it's actually true. I'm not actually against shock therapy. Do you know why? Because shock therapy is vitriol. And you could look at it as a shamanic therapy, that shock therapy is a trip to the shaman factory. That one is entering into a relationship with a shaman of pain because It provides some sort of therapy. And I'm stressing this because I want you to know that medicine doesn't fix it. Shock fixes it. Pain fixes it, because pain itself is the medicine for the hindbrain, because pain itself is rewriting the hindbrain. When you understand what pain has to flow through the sensories into a central place, the thalamus, where it is asked, is this the worst thing that you've ever felt? If the worst thing that you've ever felt is this devastatingly guilt-ridden, horrible feelings of abandonment and isolation and just evilness, then it means every time that you stub your toe, every time you bump your elbow, your brain has no choice but to fire and relive the worst experience you've ever had for the sole purpose of determining whether you stubbing your toe is worse. So your system itself can be overridden simply by having the governors. Think of these as governors. It's like a motor term when you turn up or turn down the governor, or the idle in your car. If you ever had a car that had a carburetor, I should say, you could go in and twist this governor up or down, and that governor is actually what's dictating how much that car idles or how little that car idles. And that at the very state that you have that's determining where that governor rate is a state that puts you in sympathetic shock, you are no longer a human being. You're a person living in this endless state of, oh my God, oh my God, oh my God, because you're reliving experience that your thalamus simply finds to be too overloading. There are ways to fix this. And not only is shock therapy one of them, more importantly, one of the brilliant things that I've personally seen through virtual reality is the idea of reliving an experience through a virtual setting, actually having a somatic effect on the sympathetic nerve system. That you can experience a car accident and be put into that shock I'm telling you about, where new inputs come in, and the first thing you have to do is measure it. Well, was it worse than the car accident? So now you're reliving the car accident. And by repeating the car accident in a voluntary state where you sit down and you volitionally choose to reenact the car accident in a virtual setting, you are now able to rewrite or restamp those memories. And so that the next time that you come in to compare pain to that event, you now get to compare it not to that event, but to the virtual reality reenactment of the event, that those two blend together and regulate each other, because your entire past is not somewhere outside of you. It ends at the neck. It ends at the extent of your limbic moss, your neural moss, the 7-layered pumice. And when you say, oh, I remember that deeply, you're literally saying that the neurons at the very bottom of the dendritic ocean of this moss, the ones at the very, very, very bottom, remember this reaction. They remember what happened. So the oracle of mythology is telling us the whole time, we fucking know exactly what's going on, exactly how deep or how shallow our brains are, exactly what it means when I say I turn my back to you as it pertains to this dorsal kind of life that we have alive. And I swear to you, when you see people, you can see the rat in their face, you can see the monkey in their face, you can see the reptile in their face, and you think it's just you just being a little bit too creative. And it's not. It's you using your compassion to see inside. And let me take a moment to shame anyone here who thinks that reptile is a bad word, because you are the person who's been helping to destroy society by shaming this esophagus monster, this esophagus tapeworm that takes us everywhere in the world. So when you find someone in reptile state, this is not a condescending term. This is a term of, oh my God, this could not be an easier person to compassionate. So why am I being such a tool right now by using reptilian in a derogatory way? The reptile is a baby. Does it need to poop? Does it need to pee? Does it need its mother? Does it need a nipple? Right? There are 5 things that this baby has in its menu roster, right? the reptile is the same. And for you to not compassionate the reptile is for you to choose to want to separate yourself. And hey, even that's fine with me. Nothing wrong with that. You're in charge of how big or small your universe is, aren't you? So more power to you. But if you shame the reptile in my presence, I am trying to respect my reptile. And I think that it would be a great opportunity for me to defend my reptile if I catch you doing that. So there's your warning. There's a movie I showed a while ago. It wasn't a movie, but it was a brief clip a while ago. I tried to find it today. I apologize, I couldn't. There's a video game conference uh, in which this German company is describing their walk cycle that they built for their character. And he's describing how their human character, he's carrying like a machine gun, and he's just showing you on a map of all these obstacles how their character can learn how to walk. Keep in mind that the operator can turn the joystick anywhere, but that the character somehow has to place its feet in just the right way to match the movement of the joystick in a certain direction. And if there's like cans and boxes and crevices and bars and different things, the programming, the game company guy who's giving this demonstration is explaining to you, to the other programmers in the audience, how they were able to do that. He said, this was a problem. You all know this is a problem. None of you, I've seen your game engines. None of you have solved this. And here we've solved this. And I'm going to tell you how, which is pretty cool of him to even share this. And he rendered the same world, but around the character was a red bubble that had green splotches, and these red bubble with the green splotches were places that the character could stand that would justify the existence of where he just moved, and that the splotches were built from a programming interface that required the character to build a future set inside of the game at runtime and to literally live and exist in the game engine 3 seconds ahead in the future. And that it could report back to the past. If you want to go northwest at 5 miles an hour through this terrain, you're going to have to step on this rock to do it. That it is the only way that I, out of my, in my experience, that I could map you moving through this place, and that's it. And I'm telling you this because I really want to sink home to you that the idea of walking is the idea of casting future. And that what's profound to me about this is that a four-pedal system, a system that has 4 legs, not 2, does not need any future prediction at all to work, simply because no matter where you move, there's going to be at least 2, more than that, most likely 3 legs on the ground at all times. And even if there's a box or a tree or whatever the legs press down on will count as its land, and that 4-legged creature needs no looking in the future to not fall. For the bipedal person living in a system of balance, it absolutely requires that it bends and looks into the future to walk. Walking is the act of time travel. Walking is a gift of a time machine that is living inside your head. It is so profound, this act. And when you think about that, you can imagine how much more profound running is. That running really puts you into this super state where you're becoming Prometheus. We lean forward when we run because we are falling into the future that we predict will be okay. It is this prediction that it will be okay, which satisfies our ability to even go that far. Immediacy is a word most of you have probably heard me say, but I think most of the world doesn't really understand. But immediacy is the right that you've never heard of. It's the civil right that you've never heard of. And every bird, every reptile, every bird brain, every reptile brain below you has immediacy, but you don't. And that is the very fact that you're able to observe into the future that actually denies your ability to have immediacy, because we all think, oh, I'm afraid I'm not going to move. I'm going to think about this. And we've wanted to normalize this fear of movement so bad that we've decided that the mature thing to do is to think about things. And that if you're living your best life, if you're really mature, you're going to sleep on all these big decisions for a day and think about it. And I'm not here to argue with you about that. I'm here to tell you that just like that, we lost immediacy, that we forgot how immediacy trains our brain by telling our system that, wow, you are powerful because you have immediacy, or wow, you're weak, you have no immediacy. But now our neocortex is just making things so fucking complex because it's telling us, do not eat that Taurus with sprinkles right now. You will feel horrible in 8 hours. You will call yourself a fatty McFatterson when you look in the mirror. Do not eat that Taurus. And that now you're starting to have this conversation with your immediacy, which is you cannibalizing your own reptile. Oh, I know, but you're cannibalizing your reptile. You're doing that because your neocortex has faith in your future machine so well that it thinks it's going to pull out a miracle. And it does. Do you know how I know it does? Because you strangled your reptile. Do you know how you strangled your reptile? You atrophied the top of your mouth, right? And you did it the moment you were born. You're in the womb. You're like, I love the olfactory. I can smell the universe. I can smell planets from here. I'm going to create constellations in my brain, even though I can't see outside. I can smell them from here. And the moment you're born, fuck that, man. Fuck that. This is not cool. I do not like this. This brings us back, I think, a little bit, at least, to this idea that your hindbrain is your spirit animal. And so your spirit animal is really coming from a place of, fuck, that hurt, dude. And so when you ask, my spirit animal is guiding me, what's happening is all the pain that I've ever experienced has been animized into this living creature, and it's guiding me. And so sometimes your spirit animal doesn't actually care if you have pain, if it thinks that pain might get you to this other place where it had to go to. So you start to see that your intuition is not here to give you comfort. This is hard for many of us to believe, and this is why we don't trust our intuition. We literally don't trust our intuition because our intuition causes us pain, but there's a big part of you that relies on pain to learn. Therefore, if you really had a spirit animal, it might want you to experience pain because you do not listen. You do not listen to it, or so it feels that way. And so it inspires or encourages you to embrace pain. I think that's why sometimes it says, eat the Taurus with sprinkles, James. I want you to feel like Fatty McFatterson tomorrow. I want this experience for you because this pain will finally teach you to stop eating Tauruses like that, right? So the more we ignore our systems, the more they have to terrorize us. They start to practice forms of terrorism in exchange. Okay, good, we made it. I realize that it's 8:30. I really want you to watch this video. It's 3 minutes long. If you have to go, I totally understand. You'll see it in the replay. I really want you to watch this video. I want you to see the prana economy of what's happening. If you want to stay afterwards and discuss this video, I'd love to hear what you think about it. Sorry, I'm running a little bit late today, but my goal was just to get to this video because it really encompasses what we just spoke about. Survival does not necessarily mean genius, nor does survival necessarily mean brave. That survival will be an amalgamation of a solution that sometimes is like based purely on retardation. And that it is precisely because of that retardation that we have the concept of addiction healing through maladaptation. That one of the greatest ways that we use to evolve is to maladapt to something, to actually maladapt. What I'm about to play you, there's no sound, so don't worry. You're not missing any sound. You're just watching a security camera footage from a bar. And I'd rather just not prime this idea at all and just let you watch it now. So I'm going to